Howdy, with this video, I want to go over everybody's favorite topic, MLA formatting. Wow! It's not an exciting topic, but it's very important, particularly to college level writing. And we're going to keep practicing it for this semester. Then next semester, we'll get into all the thrills of APA formatting. So, always something to look forward to there. Um, if you prefer to read things, I tend to prefer to read things and listen to videos, but there's also an MLA lecture up there that kind of goes through all this. That goes over the works cited page, citing sources in your essay, quoting, summarizing, paraphrasing, using brackets and ellipses. Um, but mainly to get into it, I'm going to look at, help resources, the sample medical research essay. The medical essay is going to be the last one we do this semester. But I have this one labeled and everything. Whoops, move the download thing on me there. I'm going to go ahead and download it so it's easier for me to highlight. But the trick with MLA formatting, just a couple of basic notes. MLA formatting stands for Modern Language Association, and we are currently in the 9th edition of that. So if you're going to use a citation generator, make sure you're in MLA 9. Also, if you use a citation generator, you're still responsible for the information it produces. So make sure the citation generators are working properly. A couple of quick notes. The whole trick to all these different types of formatting, whether it's APA, MLA, Chicago style, one, you want to credit your sources when you use them in your essay. If you just can copy and paste off the internet and throw it in an essay, that's a great way to fail a college class and maybe get kicked out of school, right? You're literally stealing somebody else's information and presenting it as your own. And it's real easy to do with modern technology, but it's still a bad thing to do. Also, you have to be accurate and precise when you use sources. I can't say, according to Joe Blow, yada, yada, yada. Then Joe Blow kind of reads it and goes like, hey, I've never said that. I might get in more trouble because I'm misrepresenting what somebody has said. So you want to be careful. You got to credit your sources and use your sources fairly within your essay. You'll see with this sample essay, that is labeled. So I'm kind of saying, like, here's a summary, here's a quote, here's whatever. But with MLA formatting, generally you want to start with the works cited page, which is going to be the last page in the essay. Excuse me. So here we are on the last page of this essay. For MLA, you just write the word works cited and a few things, works cited. Then a couple of things to notice. Everything's double spaced once in an MLA essay. Really no exceptions except maybe tables and some graphs, which we're not going to worry about. So everything's double spaced once. Everything's in alphabetical order. You do not use bullet points. You do not number them. Not in the order you use them in the essay, just in alphabetical order. They should have hanging indentation, which means if you have to go to the next line, it should be indented. It should be really nice to be able to go down the left side of the page and find a source alphabetically, and that's going to be very important. Basically, and also you need the proper formatting, which is what drives us all a little nutty. You can use the OWL, the Purdue OWL, the online writing lab, has a good MLA section. Any reference book's going to have this kind of information, and of course, I'm here to help you as well. And some of these sample essays go a long way to help show you how to do a works cited entry. But always feel free to make sure you ask me. There's always some oddball source where, if you ask me in person, I'll probably be like, I'll go look that up. But I don't have my MLA book here. Oh, yeah, I do. But all this is kind of contained within this MLA handbook. You don't have to buy one of these unless you're going to be an English teacher. But I'm happy to look things up for you as well. The basic ideas behind works cited entries, I'm going to look at a couple of these here. You always start with the author's last name, comma, then the first name. If there's more than one author, the second author is given in regular order. So here, Cutler, comma, Neal, comma, and John J. Shramick. I guess that's how you say that. If you don't have an author's name, you'll start with the next item, which is probably going to be an article title or a web page title. This should probably be in quote marks. These are like 95% rules. There's a little 5%, exceptions to the rule, but most of the time you're going to be right here. So the next thing is probably going to be in quote marks, and it's probably going to be, it should be the web page or the article title, kind of the smaller unit that's going to be in a bigger unit, or what MLA calls a container. And that's what's going to be next. The web page, the website name, or the journal, or the the journal title, or the magazine title, the database, whatever's coming from, is going to be next, and generally be italicized. It kind of depends on that sometimes. We'll probably talk about that more once we actually get into it all. After that, whatever information is required you have. If you're doing a journal or a magazine, you're going to have the date it was published and the page numbers it originally came from. You can kind of see this is a database article. That's why we got additional information there. Every different type of source is kind of different. But the basics are start with the author, last name, comma, first name, smaller unit, the article title or the web page title, then the large unit, the website title or the magazine title or whatever it is. Most of you are probably going to be using online sources, so I definitely want to see that URL, the full URL. I should click on that and go to that web page. This URL should take me to this web page, right? Not to just some general website where I got to go search out the information. That's a good way to make your English teacher grumpy, is make them go through websites trying to find where you got your stuff from. But that's basically how one's done. Good example of a book entry here. Students generally don't use books much anymore, but sometimes you do. But again, same thing. You want the author's name. There's no smaller unit. The book's published independently. So you have the title of the book, then who published it, and then the year of publication. But hopefully you can kind of see that general pattern there of starting with the author's name, smaller unit, bigger unit, whatever information after that, and especially if it's an online source, that web address. The reason it's important to have it formatted properly and in an alphabetical order is because when you go to use a source in your essay, you're going to cite that source using the first word on the works cited page and a page number if you have one. So here we got some information, obviously, because she's given us some financial information. That's coming from somewhere, and she tells us it's coming from this McNamara source. And that should be on the works cited page, and there it is. And I could go to that article in the Democrat Chronicle and find that information and make sure it's accurate, right? So as you look through a sample essay and you start seeing the citations in the parentheses, there's another one. This is a short quote. This is coming from Coping. The reason this one's in quotation marks is because it's an article title. It's not like Susan Coping here. It's Coping is the first word in the article title. And we come down here, there's the first word in the article title, and there's Coping. And because it's in alphabetical order and the hanging indents, it's easy to find that first word and see which source is being used in that particular passage. So that, again, hopefully as you're reading sample essays, you're starting to notice these citations. And that's just telling you which source on the works cited page the information is coming from. And that's really the basics of MLA formatting. Make sure you have the works cited page entries correct, and make sure you're citing the sources when you use them in your essay, whenever you use a source. If you kind of want to take a pause here, this is a good place to pause the video. Sorry. I was like the fourth video I've done today, so I'm losing my voice. So here's a good place to pause if you need a break. But I'm going to keep going. There are 4 ways to use sources in your essay. And this sample essay kind of points them out in the margins there. The first way is through a short quote. And that's where you quote directly word for word from a source. Short quote is 4 or fewer lines for MLA formatting. But quote marks are the only thing that get quote marks. I mean, short quotes are the only thing that get quote marks. So here's a good example of a short quote. Researchers Michael Castle, Dolores Thompson, and Matthew Nathans. Here we have the first word on the works cited page in the introduction to the quote, which is perfectly fine. As long as it's easy to find and I know which source you're using, right away, we're in good shape. Then we have the quote mark. We have the quote. We have the end quote. Then we have the page number in the citation. Again, if it's an internet source, it may not have a page number and you just omit it. but this one does. Then after the citation comes the period. A good example of a short quote. And all short quotes should be introduced. And of course, you need to comment on your quotes as you use them in your essay. Quotes should support what you say, not say it for you, right? But there's a good example of a short quote. Another way to use sources is with a long quote. It's the same idea. You're going to quote word for word directly from a source. But for a long quote, it's going to be 5 or more lines for MLA. Again, you want to introduce the quote. Then you tab the long quote over one tab. The whole thing should be tabbed over once, and this is the only thing that gets tabbed over once. This tells me this is going to be a word-for-word quote from this source, and if I went to Carroll and looked at page 11, I would see this material almost word for word. The only exception would be right here where the author is using brackets. These brackets show a change or addition to a quote. So if you need to clarify something, or you just need to add a word or whatever for the quote to make more sense, you would put your information in brackets. And if you kind of notice the news, when they quote Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever, sometimes you see those brackets creeping in. And that means they're adding a word or something or changing something to that quote. Some gross old man sounds coming out of me today. So if you are going to change a quote, it should be short changes. Nothing, shouldn't be changing entire passages. But if you need to clarify something or add something, use the brackets. Otherwise, the whole quote should be word for word. And you need the citation and you need the introduction, right? That's what a long quote looks like. There's another long quote right above it. The 3 dots here show that she took something out of the quote. And you can do that, but you have to, if for some reason you just want to take part of a sentence out or a sentence or two, you can do that. But you have to use those 3 dots to show that omission, and you have to make sure you're not changing the meaning of the quote. You don't want to change. You want to use other people's information accurately and fairly, right? But you can always tell a long quote because they're the only things that are tabbed over once. There's a second tab here because this began the paragraph in the original, so she went ahead and showed that paragraph indentation there. And again, there's brackets again. It looks like she added that or to the quote so it'd make more sense. And if you look up here, you can see she introduced it. And there's the first word on the works cited page. There's Carol. And then we have the page number down here. Just making sure it's clear which source you're using and if there's a page number, which page number it's coming from. But those are short quotes and long quotes. Again, short quotes are the only thing that get quote marks around them. Long quotes are the only things that are indented across, once across the page. The other 2 ways to use sources is summary and paraphrase. A summary is when you condense or shorten material in your own words and sentence structure. Generally, a summary requires your interpretation a little bit because you're kind of taking a bunch of information and shortening it. So you're going to have to kind of pick, the important parts for the purpose of your essay without misrepresenting what the author's saying. But the summary should be in your own words and sentence structure. If you're actually using the original person's words and sentence structure, why not just do a short quote, right? But sometimes maybe the language gets too technical or it's just kind of convoluted and you just kind of want to say, I just want to put this in my own words and sentence structure because I don't want to interrupt the flow of my essay or just for clarity. And that's perfectly fine. But you do got to cite that source. So here, dementia patients were often thought to be senile or crazy. They were confined to their houses and nursing homes and even mental hospitals. Then she gets a citation, then the period ends the sentence. But here she's saying this information came from this coping source. This might have been 1 or 2 pages worth of stuff, but she's like, I don't want to take my essay on this tangent. I just want to put this information, condense it so it's quick and kind of straight to the point. But you still need to cite that information. It's coming from somewhere. Above that is a good example of a paraphrase. Paraphrase is when you restate the information in the passage without leaving anything out, but you do it in your own words and sentence structure. One reason you might want to do that if you're talking about something like brain surgery, a short quote's going to leave, you can't cover entire brain surgery in 4 or fewer lines. A long quote might get kind of tedious. It might get too technical. If you just go to a medical journal and throw something in your essay. I'm an English teacher, not a brain surgeon, so the language might get too technical. And my favorite comment sometimes is, "Hey, what do you think this means in a passage?" And a student goes like, "I don't know." It's like, well, it's your quote in your essay. How come you don't know what you're saying? But you might want to, so instead of a long quote that gets too technical, you can't do a summary, right? If you condense it and start leaving scalpels and sponges in people's brains, it's not going to make much sense. So you might have to do a paraphrase where you restate the original, but in your own words and sentence structure to dummy it down for your English teacher. But you don't want to leave out main points because it's a very technical surgery, so you gotta keep everything in there. Good example of why you might want to use a paraphrase. There's an example here talking about the origins of discovering Alzheimer's. But again, as she does this, it's in her own words and sentence structure. And of course, she has to cite the source of that information down here with Cutler and Stramick. If you kind of notice as you're looking, the difference between the formatting of a summary and paraphrase isn't much. Generally, summaries are shorter, paraphrases are longer. But the format is kind of the same. Sometimes if you're in the middle of a passage, you might want to do a signal phrase like this, according to a 2-year study. That kind of indicates that I'm about to get into some information she's getting from a source. There's no quote marks around it, so this looks like a summary because it's kind of short there. And she cites the information that she gives, right? So hopefully as you're looking at these sample essays, you start to notice the difference between a short quote, which has quote marks, long quote, which is offset, summary, which is kind of a short, but it's in the author's own words and sentence structure, but still cited, and a paraphrase, which tend to be kind of longer and not leaving out important information. There's a good example of a paraphrase, it looks like, where she's taking this information about the moderate stage of dementia. You don't want to leave out any of the main points there, but she wanted to put it in her own words and sentence structure. But of course, she's citing the source of that information. So she's doing a good job there, which is obviously why I would choose an essay like this. When you go back and look at that sample essay for the career essay, I didn't hit help. Under help resources, which we talked about. Let me go ahead and download that real quick. There we go. If you start looking through this, it's not labeled as much as the other one, but when you start seeing these citations, that's a signal to you that, and there's no quote marks, it's not offset or anything, so this is a summary or paraphrase. Pretty short summary of what it is to be a mechanical engineer, so that's a good example of a summary there, right? But again, sometimes the difference between a summary and paraphrase may be kind of ambiguous. That's just the way it is. Here he's talking about the different classes he needs for his Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering. It might be a bit of a summary, a bit of a paraphrase, but he's putting the information in his own words and sentence structure as much as he can. You can't change Chem 120, right? But the rest of it's in his own words and sentence structure, and he's citing that information. And that citation is what the important part. He's obviously getting this information from somewhere. It's not a long quote, it's not a short quote, so that's either a summary or paraphrase. Then down here, just in a couple of passages here, one, he has a short quote because he has the quote marks here. He's using the ellipses to show some omission from the original work. And he's giving that word for word and citing it. Even if you give this introduction like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is perfectly fine to do, the first word on the works cited page is United States, so he still needs to cite that using the word United. Then here, this is not a short quote because there's no quote marks around it, so that's probably a summary because it's kind of short. And of course, long quotes are easy to find because they're offset. And there we go. There's a good example of a long quote, right? Because it's offset, it's word for word, and of course it's cited there. So again, if you go to the works cited page, we should see the word United and mechanical. That's the source he was defining mechanical engineering from. That's where he's getting some of his information about the career. But a good looking works cited page. One thing that's missing there, every works cited entry should end in a period. But hopefully you're going to use the sample essay, the sample career essay to start formatting your own works cited entries. And of course, I'm here to help you as well. But kind of notice if you have that works cited page done, citing sources in your essay becomes pretty easy. If you're kind of using stuff in your essay and you think, I'll cite it and put it on works cited page later, that's when students run into trouble because they forget where they got the information from. If you don't cite things correctly, the plagiarism detector kind of picks that up, and students run into problems there, right? But if you have any questions as you're working on your career essay, be sure to let me know. Particularly if you have a source you're like, okay, I have no idea how to cite this, how to put this on a works cited page. I'm happy to help you. I got the big book here. I'm happy to look it up. But with the way technology is changing and the different types of information we can access, even the big book gets obsolete pretty quickly. So sometimes we might have to just not make it up, but kind of do the best we can with the information we're provided. But if you have any questions, be sure and let me know, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.